Hi all, another Tim Talk Tuesday here, and I've been thinking about how the brain works and its impact on teaching and learning. There's a great book by Eric Jensen called Teaching with the Brain in Mind, and this is the second edition, and there's actually, I believe, a new one coming out here real soon, and so I'm really looking forward to that. But before I get into some of that stuff, I use an analogy that recently, actually in the past year or so, I learned how to make cheese sauce for hot browns, which is one of our favorite meals here at the house. And one of the things I learned about making cheese sauce is that you have to do it right. You have to have the right ingredients, you have to have the right conditions, and just as important, you have to have the right timing. And I made my mistakes first as I followed the recipe by thinking that things need to be a certain way. And I wasn't patient, and I wasn't willing to do the work that it took to stir for 2 or 3 minutes to make the right sauce. But once I learned that there was a technique, and I kept at that technique, cheese sauce turned out pretty good. And I'm pretty excited that now our hot browns taste pretty decent. But how that applies to what I've been thinking about in terms of teaching and learning is that we now know so much about how a brain functions and how we learn and how conditions, what circumstances, and how do we help students really maximize their learning. We've been learning these things for well over 20 something years with the advent of MRI, functional MRI things, various sundry psychological testing, things that we have fully developed over the last few years that we didn't have back when I first started teaching. And what we've learned is that there are definitive things that have to be in place for kids to learn optimally. The conditions in which kids come into the classroom, the preparation, as Jensen would put it, are they prepared to learn? Do they have the health and the wellness aspects? Have they eaten well? Have they slept well? Have they done all of the things that prepare their brain? And as a teacher, what are we doing to make sure that that's happening? Because if the brain's not prepared to learn, it's not going to. Similarly, when we go to teach the material, we now know that the brain absorbs information best when we are emotionally connected to it, that it is something that's relevant to our survival and to our interest. It's something new to us that we realize we haven't approached this before. We can make connections to prior learning. All of these things and more, we now know how important they are. So those must be added into the classroom recipe as we go forward. And there's another aspect about timing that's really important as well. We must give ourselves time to not only receive the information, but then we have to process it. We have to consolidate it into our long-term memory. And we know more about how that works than ever before. And if we're not taking these things directly into account when we're teaching, then we're not optimizing the learning that can happen, and we're minimizing students in the process. So like the cheese sauce, there's definitive ways for us to make that, and we have to put in the time and the effort and the right ingredients and be patient to make it happen. Same thing happens when we are trying to help others learn. We've got to prepare them for the learning. We then have to present it and build it in a way they construct the meaning and the importance into their short-term memory, and then we have to then give it time to consolidate into the long-term memory. There's a lot of details to that are really fascinating, and I encourage you to check out his book, Teaching with the Brain in Mind, and looking forward to the new edition that's coming out. But more than anything else, as we're looking at a new year coming up soon, and whether that's going to be online learning or face-to-face, if we know how to do something better in terms of teaching and we don't do it, then we are negligent and we are creating a less than optimal environment. Now that we know how the brain works, we must implement that into the lessons that we teach and into the whole school environment. So again, I challenge you to take a look at some of those, and let's empower our learning and our teaching. Have a great day.